All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about just other ministries, I guess is the best way to define it within the church. So that's going to be youth ministries, children's ministries, uh, every other
Sunday school.
Sunday school. Yeah. So all the different types of ministries that churches have and kind of how that fits. So we've talked about in previous episodes leadership, flow of service, all of those sorts of things, and tried to, to the best of our ability, point back to the word on those and say, this is what it says and why we should do it, or at least point back to why things should be done in a theological manner, to point people to the glory of God. So I know this is going to be an interesting podcast, specifically for me, have been in youth ministry for a long time. My entire Instagram account is called The Honest Youth Pastor. So,
So let's be honest.
yeah, to be super honest. So I think some of where I fall in this might be surprising to people, but I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. So there is a clip. We'll kind of use this off as a jumping off point. I'm sure when when you guys are listening to this, I'll provide a link to this video as well. But there's a video of Vody Baucham, and if you don't know who that guy is, if nothing else, turn this off and go listen to him. You're gonna learn a lot.
Yeah, he's awesome.
But
Smart guy.
Yeah, that guy. I would definitely recommend you listen to him. But he has a video specifically that talks about youth ministry and touches on children's ministry as well, and how those are not biblical models of how things should be done, and really brings up the question, should a church have a youth ministry or a children's ministry, how we do it now. So to kind of define that for you guys, obviously youth ministry and children's ministries are used as a way of, okay, so the big adults have the big church and the kids have the youth ministry, and then the little kids have children's church, and maybe we all break off and divide up during worship times for those. Youth ministry on Wednesday night, same thing. So there's adult Bible study in most churches, or in a lot of churches, and then youth group for other people. And the whole purpose of this episode really comes from that idea that Vody Baucham presents, which is that those aren't biblical models. And if we look at the Bible, what we see is a much different setup of kind of how things are supposed to be done. So I want to get your take real quick, Rob, on kind of that video, the big takeaways you saw from it, and we'll probably end up talking about why churches do things now and maybe how we can rethink those.
Yeah, so we've actually had this conversation, not conversation, but I've thrown it out multiple times, even in our church, right? So we have these same ministries, right? In our church, we have a youth group. We have Awana.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that, we have Sunday school for all ages. So we have this stuff that we do, and I tend to agree with what Vody Baucham is coming out with on that, with his premise and his point when he talks about all these other ministries. And in that, one of the things that children's ministry and youth ministry, which is kind of the same thing, just for different ages, right? It's the same concept. One of the things that they can do, right, is it, I think in large part, has taught the adults in our family of believers that they're not responsible, that they're not as responsible for the discipleship, for making disciples of their kids, as the church is, right? And that's not true. As a dad, like, my first responsibility is not to this church. My first responsibility is husband and dad, right? Like that's who God gave me before I ever moved to this town, right? And so if I'm not making disciples at home, right? Like we have this view, I think, in America, that discipling as a parent is simply teaching our kids to be good American citizens, and so I think those things are all good, but I think that they're maybe outreaches, if anything else. Like I've had this conversation with Awana specifically at our church. So we've done Awana for a long time. It's been a thing here since long before I came
Hmm.
to town, and it's a good thing. But two of the things that happen with Awana that are a struggle for me sometimes is a large portion of our church body. It takes a lot of us to make that work,
To run it. Hmm.
right? Yeah, to serve there, and it becomes the method of discipling for a lot of
For the
parents,
kids.
right?
Hmm.
So I've publicly even tried to stress, okay, if in fact just a few weeks ago I preached, and it was about missional, kind of our direction as a missional church, and in that sermon I even said that I hope you're not bringing your kids to Awana so that the church can teach them how to be
Yeah.
disciples,
Hmm.
right? Like, it's important for us, I think, to do that. Like, if Awana's the basis that you're using for you to disciple your kids, and this is kind of the supplement to
Hmm.
that, great, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Hmm.
do it all the time.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of kids that come to our Awana that are kids from town, right? Their
Yeah. They
parents
don't.
have
Hmm.
nothing to do with Christ. They don't give a crap. We're babysitting for them,
Hmm.
right? For that
Yeah.
time. That's good. That's fine. That's what we want, right?
Hmm.
But only if it's presented in such a way that we're not enabling parents to not be disciplers.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that's a huge point to make in this conversation about it, is that why do those ministries exist? So, so
Yeah.
for example, like you said, like if somebody sins, and I had this happen in a couple of churches that I was youth pastor at, that the kids would come to youth group or, Sunday school for youth in the morning on Sundays. And that would be essentially where they would have a lot of their learning take place about the Bible. I mean, I had kids come to Sunday school that they'd been in church their whole lives. Their parents had been in church their whole lives, but they were asking like super basic questions that like they should have been asking their parents, like that I would have thought would have already been covered. Now, again, I mean, like we've mentioned in previous episodes, when we're teenagers, sometimes we don't listen as well as I mean, people could have easily told them some of the answers to this and they just didn't hear it. But what I found is lots of times, and one church in particular, I got a lot of pushback at, was that, hey, I made this to the elder board that, hey, the reason we do this ministry is because we have so many kids coming out from from the community. I mean, at one point our youth ministry was 90% community kids and 5% what you would consider church kids.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of pushback from that for whatever reason on the parents' part, because they were like, well, my kids are around these kids that cuss and they do drugs and they're dangerous and they're a bad influence. And I was just like, okay, first of all, your kids should really be discipled enough to know the difference. And, not that they're not going to be influenced, but like if you're doing the discipleship on the other end of it, not that they're going to be perfect kids, but they're
Yeah.
gonna at least know, like they're gonna know the difference between right and wrong, which most of these kids that were coming from the community didn't. They didn't have a concept of good, bad, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched that, have that conversation about, why do we do these ministries? I think it comes back to what you said. I'm totally fine with having a youth ministry, a children's ministry, whatever other thing you want to call it. I don't think I fit Sunday school in that. We might talk about that here in a minute, but those ministries as outreaches to the community, not a class for the kids that come already to church, that already have, Christian parents. Like, yeah, I want them to be involved, but for the sole purpose of making sure that these kids that don't have Christian parents can see what the gospel does. Like they can see
Yep.
that in action. They can see that these kids hopefully live different lives because of what Jesus has done in their lives, and it be an outreach. But I think, like you said, if it comes to a point where the parents aren't doing devotions at home, they're not praying at the home, nobody sees mom and dad reading the Bible. Like the only time you see the Bible opened is at church, is when this becomes a problem.
Yep.
And one of the things that he mentions in the video is that there shouldn't be a title of youth pastor, because what that does is that points off that basically gives that minister, like, okay, you're in charge of these youth, when in fact it's actually supposed to be the parent that's in charge of these kids in general. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
um, it's almost deliberately making a point to say, don't worry, we've got your kids discipled. You don't have to do it. So
Yep.
That would be like where I totally agree with him. Like, so the irony was that I've been a youth pastor. I talk about youth ministry all the time, but when I get to the other side of this conversation, I say, you know something, I think I'm not saying burn the whole thing down, no more youth ministry or children's ministry. I'm just saying that we really need to be deliberate in how we think about it.
Yep.
And to say that, look, if you have a youth ministry that is only consistent of kids of that already go to this church and nobody that doesn't, like what are you doing? Because as a youth pastor, it's not your job to disciple them. Like that's not your, I mean, like, yeah, be there to answer questions and help them along, but really you're taking that privilege away from their mom and dad when you do that.
Yeah, I think for us, if we ever, at least this is my vision for it, if we ever have a youth pastor here, it would be probably called something like youth and family pastor, because what that role would be, sure, they might have like training for youth, because you and I both know, and people who would already know who you are and listen to your stuff will already know that, I mean, teaching youth to be on mission is completely different than teaching adults. One, because of the maturity level, but two, because like adults and what they face in the workplace, unless you're like in a really populated city, it's way different than what kids are now facing in school, right? And so it is different, right? And we should help usher that along, like, and train and equip them just like we equip the adults. But the reason I say that would need to be like a family pastor as well is, like, the whole point would be, let's equip the parents. The first goal is let's equip these parents to equip their youngsters, right?
Well, and that's been one of the arguments when I have had this discussion with people. They say, well, what if mom and dad aren't spiritually, what if they're baby Christians? And they honestly don't know or don't feel comfortable with discipling their kid because they literally themselves don't know. And I mean, that's a valid question, but I think having somebody like the position you just mentioned, somebody that is able to, help them along. So if dad doesn't know the question, for example, he can come to an elder and say, hey, hopefully he's already being discipled within the body, but I think it's unfortunately a fantasy to say that happens everywhere. But he at least needs a place to go that he says, look, as a godly father, I want to develop my family. I don't know the answer. Can you help me along here and walk me through it? So I think that would be a great role, because at that point, like you said, you're just helping and equipping. It's not taking that out of his hands, because I think the leaning for a baby Christian would be like, look, I already got a ton of responsibility. I work all the time. I don't have time to answer these questions. Just go to youth group because I want to take a nap. Whereas if you're deliberate in saying, hey, look, you're supposed to be discipling your family. And again, that has to be said from the pulpit. They're not going to hear it anywhere else, or from somebody that's discipling them. That is your responsibility. You have to do it. I know whenever me and Christina do marriage counseling for couples, or premarital counseling before we marry a couple, I make it a point that I tell that guy, look, you are responsible. Like, when you stand before God, did you do what you were supposed to do as a father, as a husband? Did you disciple your family? That's you. That's not on her. Never going to be on her. That's on you. So just making sure that people know that, because a lot of guys, I mean, in the society we live in, where fatherlessness is a huge thing, maybe have never seen that worked out, or so I think that position would be super helpful to have.
Yeah, we have. So I want to say this too, like, and this probably goes, not probably, it does. This goes for any podcast that we'll probably ever do, right? Like, talking about this, I don't want anyone who ever hears this or sees this on YouTube or something to think that we're saying these things because we've got it figured out.
Oh, no.
Right? Because like, for me, the views that I'm kind of portraying or that are coming out of my mouth, absolutely, I believe are true and right. But like, I still struggle with all this stuff, right? Personally. And it's easy for, like, there have been times even this week that I've said to the boys, hey, just go downstairs and watch cartoons, right?
Please go away.
Yeah. I mean, that's every human being that has procreated, right?
Yeah.
Has that struggle. So, but it's something that we all like have to work toward together, because man, when I get before God, I'm going to have a lot more to answer for than whoever is teaching my kids in Sunday school, right? For when it comes to them in particular, I'm the one that's discipling them or choosing not to. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, and I think to build on that point, it's a great call out. Like, you have to understand that you're not in this alone. I know you mentioned in a previous podcast, you have an elder in your church that's older that you've gone to before about, family situations. So it's important to know that, yeah, it's going to be super stressful. That doesn't take the responsibility off you in any regard.
Yeah.
But in that stress, you have to understand that instead of throwing up your hands and being like, well, this just can't be done, that you have a network of people that you go to. And again, this all comes back. I mean, we're eventually touch on this, I think, at some point in a podcast, but like, that's why the body is so important. You're not just some lone individual in a church attending once or twice a week, trying to be uplifted. You are part of a body for a purpose, because you've been called to something extremely important, but also extremely difficult and stressful.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to have those people in your life that you can go to and say, look, like, this happened this week. My kid, like, I thought I knew him and I found something else out. Like, it's just like, everything's burned to the ground. I'm not doing this right. And somebody that can come along and be like, look, it's no big deal. Like, I mean, like you said, that gentleman that you can go to, they can be like, look, they burnt the house down once and we're all still good. Like, don't worry about it. Like,
right,
pray for him, be there for him,
Yeah.
love him like, Jesus loves you. That's the important part. So I think, like you said, it's a great call out. Like, it can be very overwhelming, but you have to understand that literally no one's perfect, and just relying on the body is so important. So
yeah. And I mean, no church is perfect. We have even in churches where it looks like, man, they have this down, they might just have it down a lot more than where you attend or where you're a member. But there are people that fall through those cracks at every,
Well, I think if you were to ask them the history, they'd be like, yeah, but you weren't here for when this happened. Like, the only reason we're flowing so well now is because there was a disaster 10 years ago.
Right. And that's true of here. I mean, it is. I know of stories that have happened here a long time ago that are just like, holy smokes, like, how did you make it through that? Yeah.
No, exactly. So, so on that, so obviously I think that we would put Sunday school kind of in a different category than youth ministry, children's ministry, those like Awanas, because just because of the history. Now, obviously those ministries came out of Sunday school, but just a brief history in case nobody's looked it up or is a nerd. So Sunday school, there's not like a definitive time when it started, but basically what ended up happening in England is the only day that kids were not free, because this is before child labor laws, they were working, and the only day they could not work was Sunday. And they were uneducated. For the most part, they were just mischievous, as kids are. And the churches started deciding that, hey, we can actually educate these children that don't have an education. They don't have to work in the mines forever. Like, we can help them learn basic things, and we can do it through the Bible. So literacy, we can teach them through the Bible. Spelling, we can teach them through the Bible. Just basic human interaction, we can teach them through the Bible. So they started getting classes together on Sundays to teach these kids these things that they weren't going to learn ever, because they were working every single day of the week. And so they got them together. And the funny thing is, when I looked into this history, the church hated it. They hated Sunday school because you were working on the Lord's Day to teach these kids. And it was a huge controversy. Well, we'll find something to be mad about all the time. Don't worry about it. So
I'm mad about that. So yeah, you're right.
So they got it together, and they were, again, the church was using their gifts as an outreach to the community because they saw a need. And obviously what ended up happening is Sunday school morphed into something completely different because child labor laws became a thing that didn't work all the time. Obviously in our day now, some kids don't start working until they're 20, and there's a plethora of other things for them to do. So what Sunday school originally was obviously teaching children that were unable to be educated, were never going to get educated, and now it's shifted into, for most churches, a thing we do before the service,
Mm-hmm.
for adults and kids as well. Like, it's just, we're replicating youth ministry and children's ministry and adult ministry in little classrooms before Sunday morning. So not that he touched on it in his video, but I think a lot of his same ideas could apply to Sunday school, that you really have to rethink why you're doing that. I've seen a lot of churches do small groups instead of Sunday school. They've just shifted and, used it
Mm-hmm.
more as a discipleship group. But
Yeah.
so what is your take on that? Because I know, again, with all the changes you guys are doing, that's probably something you're really looking at as well.
Yeah, it is. We've done since I've come to this church, we've done several different things actually, specifically for adult Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
The children's Sunday school has largely been the same, and it's probably like on the list to be renovated
Mm-hmm.
some, but not there yet. But we've I think Sunday school for us specifically is the same sort of deal as Awana is, in the sense that we actually had a gal that came and dropped her kids off for Sunday school and then just left, and then she would come and
Okay.
pick them up after. I mean,
Yeah.
like it exists, right? We have people who
Mm-hmm.
come in and from town or whatever, or who bring their friends or whatever. But Sunday school is not nearly as successful at that for us as Awana is. Like, you
Yeah.
could legitimately call Awana an outreach. Not that it's bad or detrimental to have kids be taught the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy to say that, right?
No, why are
But
you doing that?
yeah, how dare you? But it's also something that can get in the way of parents being parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Parents being godly parents, which means you're making disciples. That's number one thing. And
Yeah.
um, with our adult Sunday school, we have a lot of folks who come just because Sunday school is the thing.
That's what
Like
they
when,
do.
there was a time a few years ago that we swapped the times so that Sunday school was after
Yeah.
church,
Mm-hmm.
so that attendance for Sunday school would go up. That was literally the reason.
So you
And
didn't change anything about Sunday school? You just switched the time?
no, yeah, because we wanted more people there.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. I would have thought somebody would have been like, hey, we can do discussion of the sermon, but you didn't change anything.
no. And I think what
They
you
even
just
try to hide
said,
it.
yeah, what you just said brings up the point that, like, I've said this before about small groups and all kinds of things. Like, if you're teaching Sunday morning, Sunday school, small group, maybe a women's study, like,
Mm-hmm.
you have you have 4 things in 1 week that you're trying to digest that should take you a week or so to
Mm-hmm.
digest,
Yeah.
right?
Like,
And
efficiently.
so, like, we've talked about, like, our youth Sunday school just changed a little bit. And okay, I take it back. Not yet, but after the current curriculum that they're going through Matt Chandler's Apostles' Creed
Oh, wow.
stuff. Yeah.
Youth group? Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but when they're
Most
finished
kids
with
don't know the
that,
word creed other than Assassin's Creed.
or the band. No, wait, that was
That was a
when we
long
were kids.
time ago, man. With
Man.
our wide open.
Oh man. Under the sunlight. Yeah, but what they're going to start specifically, like, if whoever's preaching,
Mm-hmm.
or if we have a guest preacher or whatever, we'll find out what they're preaching about, or usually we give them a text, like, whatever's next, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, because,
But whoever's preaching will come up with a few questions that are essentially discussion questions. And, like, me, honestly, long-term vision is that's what our missional communities are going to discuss that
Mhm.
week. That's what Sunday school should be about. Obviously, it should be age appropriate so they get
Yeah.
it. But that's the youth group. It'll be the first kind of area to experiment with that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're gonna discuss what we're discussing as a church. Our Sunday school for adults hopefully will eventually be aligned kind of with that a little bit. Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of where
Well,
we're at, I guess,
I
right
think
now.
a lot of that, like what you're saying, as far as the changing of it and how you're going about it, is incredibly important. Because I mean, this concept I think is a really good concept as far as making sure you're intentional, like we've talked about in previous episodes, but making sure you're intentional about what you're doing. So if you just have a Sunday school or a youth group or a children's group to either disciple the kids when they, I mean, the focus is wrong. Like just refocusing what you're doing, but in the same regard, if you've done it for literally decades, you can't just burn the whole thing down,
right,
and hope that it rises like a phoenix from the ashes. Like you're going to have to be very purposeful in how you explain why you're doing. I mean, so in the previous episode, we talked about music and like worship wars and all that kind of stuff. And I think I've seen it done so well where a pastor has gotten up and said, "Hey, look, we know we're going to transition our musical style, and this is why, and this is how long it's going to take, and this is what we're doing to ensure that we're doing it well, so that everybody knows the why, like why we're doing this, how this aligns with the vision, and why it's important." And then I've also seen a guy get up like from one Sunday you're singing hymns, and the next Sunday it doesn't matter who thinks what, we're doing this, and now it's just Hillsong, and it's like there's no transition, there's no explanation, and then everybody goes, "Well, why is everybody mad? This is better worship." And you're like, well,
yeah,
you didn't explain the why. Like you put a blurb in, you talked about it, but it wasn't like you didn't. Some things have to be changed slowly, and I
yeah,
think this idea is great. And like what you said, like you're experimenting in different places so that your people can see, look, I know you've always attended Sunday school. I know you've always done it just because you're attending Sunday school, but
yep.
would it not be better to actually process, like you said, one message, not five? Plus, and you can maybe speak to this a little bit. I know in the places that have done that, it helps everybody. So instead of having five, or four not so well done messages and one really good one, you have one super solid, well researched. Because if you're going to put resources out for your message, you're going to have to do a whole lot more research on your message. So you get one really.
Well,
solid.
never mind then.
I'm not doing that. That's you just said more work. But you have one like super solid message that literally can feed your body for the entire week. And the way you guys do it, we haven't done an episode on this. We'll definitely do one eventually about expositionally preaching through the word. But like that, I think is also beneficial because now the meal they ate last week is building on the meal they're going to eat this week.
Yep.
And it's built out a little bit more. So anyway, I think it's a controversial subject because if essentially if you are in a youth ministry position and you're not thinking this way, like you have to, now your job's at jeopardy. Like,
yeah.
Oh no.
Well, and so I think renovation is probably the word, right? So for us, we're renovating almost every area of what we do and who we are as a church. And it's based on context. It's based on areas that we obviously need to change because, I mean, our stage, right? This is trivial, but our stage has feather dusted walls, right?
Oh no.
So anybody,
Yeah.
that's like 25 that walks in here is going to go, okay, mom lives here. Got
Yeah.
it. And not that we're trying to please everybody, right?
Yeah.
Or
But
make a
we're talking
vibe,
about
right?
impression,
But but we've got to we have slowly become a church that's okay with change, right? And that's kind of at the heart of why this would be controversial in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. And man, that's been a journey. It's been difficult. Like you said, I thought about bringing this up in our Flow podcast when we did that, but one of the things that you said in a off the books conversation we had was that they changed the handshaking time at church and people flipped out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the nature of it. Like there are things that you do and it's simply people don't even know why they're mad, right? Like at the end of the day,
it's
other than
different.
Why are you doing this differently?
Yeah.
I put tables in our sanctuary once, round tables
Uh-oh.
instead of the chairs. And uh, quite literally, we just did it on purpose for a special Sunday, but
Mhm.
quite literally we did it because we were going to do communion a certain way.
Okay. Hmm.
And we had a couple of folks who, like, older folks, and straight up they were like, I don't know if I want to come back here anymore.
My goodness.
And these people have been members for, like, you know,
Hmm.
25 or 30 years.
Yeah. It's
So, I
just,
mean,
yeah. Well, you change one thing. I mean, not to distract from the
that was big
conversation,
though.
but yeah. Do you remember the
Yeah.
time in youth group when Mark brought in the black light, or was it Anthony? One of the youth pastors brought in the black light, and then the next week they're like, "No more black lights because black lights are from the devil." And I was like, "What?" Like he was just trying to change it up a little bit, and like one light. Oh, that threw
Yep.
everybody. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, great point. Great point there. As far as just, I think we have to remember, especially I think younger people like ourselves, especially when you go, okay, like we see where we need to take it, right? So we see that there's an
Yep.
issue, and it needs to be some refocusing. But oftentimes, I know I've very much been guilty of this. That I want to go 1,000 miles an hour to get there, and not explain, like, just whoever burns down and leaves in my path, that's fine. They weren't ever really on board or love Jesus anyway.
Yep.
And you have to realize that, like, it's extremely important to know that, look, this is also part of my body. I have to take their, they've been doing this for so long. They don't, even if I explain the why well, like, it's so in some cases you need to go to those people and be like, look, I know you were a little uncomfortable with this. Why were you uncomfortable with this? Let's talk through it. I mean, just to try to retain them, as long as it's good to retain them. Like they have valid concerns, or just to kind of talking through it, not put the pedal to the metal so much. But like you said, be like, look, we're testing it here because we need to refocus. And hopefully, I mean, you're not going to be able to, like you said, you're not going to be able to please everybody. A table in the sanctuary for one person may be the straw that breaks their back, and they may need to go somewhere else
Yep.
that never would ever put tables in the sanctuary if that's what's going to keep them, keep them going. But so anyway, that I think that's the important thing that I've learned through this conversation when I've had it, is that just that you have to realize that it's going to take a minute to get some people on board, and you need to go slow in some respects in order to make sure everybody can come along with you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a two-way street, right? I mean, and it's about, again, it's about balance between the extremes, right? I don't want to make so many changes so fast that the people who have to make this big paradigm shift are just left in the dust completely, and they're like, I can't. So, like, even some of the mature Christians are going to go, I'm out. I don't even know what's going on right now. But at the same time, right, you're moving in a direction that for us, the elders are all in agreement. 80-90% of the church is really in agreement. The others maybe undecided, and you've got 4 or 5 couples that are like, no, right? I mean, at some point, they're going to be uncomfortable enough, they're going to leave, and I have to be comfortable enough and sold enough that I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I mean that's happened before. There's been people, and I think the thing that we have to realize, like this whole conversation, is that one, we need to know that there are some things that need to be refocused, and have the courage to refocus them, despite what anybody says. And then secondly, know that even if these people, so there's, for example, there's this couple that were amazing, godly volunteers for a youth ministry I was a part of, and the music got shifted at the church, and literally the next Sunday they left. Now, I have a complete disagreement with them about their heart in that, but they had a conviction that some of the lyrics, which I would agree with in some regards, were not, they didn't agree with them. And for whatever reason, that was kind of like the last straw. And we had to be okay with, look, I know they volunteer, but that doesn't carry more weight about the direction that we need to go on this thing.
Yeah.
So just realizing that, look, I love you, reaching out and having that conversation. And if they still decide to leave, like, just because you, and this is, I mean, again, I think it's a lot of a heart issue for some people. the comment was made by one of these people that, look, we do a lot here. We volunteer a lot here. And, you're not regarding that. And here's the thing, like, none of us are finished products. None of us are perfect.
Yep.
In every other regard, this person is a very godly individual. It's just that thing. There was just so much pride in that area that they thought that carried weight for that situation. So you have to be okay with knowing that, look, we need to refocus this. We need to change this. And I'm going to try to keep you along for the ride. I'd love for you to be here along for the ride, but this is the refocus we're making. This is why. I'd hope you prayerfully consider coming along with us, but if you can't do that, okay.
Yeah, and it takes leadership that's willing to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And if many aren't, and I think that is why in this nation we're going to probably continue to see lots of churches have to put chains on the doors and sell their property instead of flourishing and making a difference and changing their cities, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to hold things that are tradition for you with an open hand.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you're dead. You're dead already, right? I mean, you just are. Mm. There are things that can't be compromised, absolutely. But how we arrange the chairs is not one of them.
Yeah. Amen. All right. Good deal. So hopefully this conversation has been helpful in regards to just getting us thinking. What we want to do is think about why we do what we do. And if we find that maybe, hey, we inadvertently are telling the parents in our church, don't worry, we'll disciple your kids. Maybe we need to just make a conscious effort to refocus that and say, hey, look, guys, it's your job to disciple. I mean, just slip that in however you can. If you feel like that's a sermon that needs to be preached, awesome. Preach that sermon. Build that into maybe even, I know churches that have built that into their discipleship membership curriculum that, hey, when you're coming on board, this is what we believe and why we believe it. So as a father, you're supposed to do this. As a mother, father, you're supposed to do this. But whatever it looks like, just refocusing that. And as we've mentioned, making sure you know that it's not the pedal to the metal approach that's going to fix it. It's the long-term, prayer and fasting and explaining and then doing that 5,000 more times that'll get you there. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it at least gets you thinking. That's kind of the point of these podcasts along the lines of getting you thinking about why we're doing it, and how we can maybe change it. What are we talking about next time?
Evangelism / church planning / models for that type of thingy.
Gotcha. So it's a junk drawer episode for everything we haven't talked about yet. There had to be something that we're like, hey, we can't fit this into this, but we'll fit it in this last episode. Okay, awesome. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. And make sure, I haven't mentioned this yet on any of the previous episodes, but make sure you're leaving 5-star reviews and leaving some reviews as far as words too about how we're super smart and you're you need to listen.
And and listen, if you don't do that, you might end up on a podcast. At least your name.
Yeah. And he's just saying, I mean, if you don't leave a review, we might question if you're saved. So.
Okay, cut. We got to go.
I think I took that too far. Okay, anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you next time.